There's been a lot more weird shit going on, even shit going on in the ocean.
Ooh, the ocean?
In China and in Asia, right? There's these fish called oarfish. She's like 11 feet long ass fish, bro. But they only come out when something terrible is gonna happen.
Oh my gosh.
There's mythology behind them that whenever they see them, they're called the doomsday fish. And they're saying like, yo, they're either running from something or they're trying to warn us. Because they live 1,000 to 2,000 feet below sea level. They came out before in 2011 in Fukushima when they had the nuclear plant like went crazy. They had a tsunami.
Okay.
They had a tsunami and an earthquake. And then in 2019, there was a big ass blackout. And then they had one of the worst earthquakes
ever
in history, bro. And now recently, a lot of like biologists and like divers and shit are seeing more and more
of oarfish?
Oarfish coming about, bro. Like, bro, we're already desensitized to it. Think about it. Me and my brother, right? We were talking about, we're like, yo, they just confirmed.
There were two brothers who lived in a small apartment with their parents on the outskirts of the city. There wasn't a lot of space, so the brothers shared a room. One night, their parents went to visit relatives who lived in the country, and the one brother stayed out late that night with his friends. When he got home, it was already past midnight. He didn't want to wake up his brother who was sleeping, so he didn't turn on the light and he took off his clothes super quietly. As he was getting into bed, he heard his brother groan and ask for a glass of water. He then went to the kitchen and got his brother a glass of water and gave it to him. He then said goodnight and got into bed. At 6 a.m., the brother was woken up by knocking at the door. He got out of bed and went to the door. When he opened the door, standing there was his brother. He then asked, "Where were you?" And his brother said he stayed the night at his girlfriend's house. He then asked, "So you didn't come home last night?" And his brother replied, "No." Suddenly, his heart started to pound. He ran to the bedroom and turned on the light. His brother's bed was empty, and there was an empty glass next to his bed.
Imagine being killed by a flying cow. That is genuinely what happened to a man in India. It was April 2023 and Shivdayal Sharma was an 82-year-old pensioner. He was in Alwar, India, near to a train station. He needed the toilet, but there didn't seem to be any nearby. He decided to find a somewhat secluded spot in order to relieve himself. Little did he know a cow had wandered onto the train tracks. In a case of extremely unfortunate timing, a train happened to be hurtling down the tracks at that exact minute. Now, the trains there typically reach speeds of 100 miles an hour. Therefore, there was absolutely no chance that this cow would be able to jump out of the way in time. The cow was struck by the oncoming vehicle. The cow was actually launched 30 meters into the air because it was hit with such force. The cow flew through the air and right into the path of the urinating pensioner. The force that the cow hit him with was so intense that it killed him instantly. This is what the train looked like after the incident. Another pedestrian was also inches away from being hit by the cow too.
If this doesn't disturb you, I don't know what will. 2 weeks ago, a 15-year-old in Utah contacted the police and claimed that their own parents had been assaulting them for over a year. So the identity of the victims and the perpetrator have been concealed for now, but this is what we know. Apparently, about a year ago, the parents of the victim found that their child had been Snapchatting and engaging with chats with strangers online, and that these chats with strangers had been graphic, if you know what I mean. These two parents then decided that it would be safer if they engaged in these graphic acts with their own daughter instead. This led to a year and a half of abuse by the victim's stepfather. Abuse that her mother allegedly joined in on. When the victim's stepfather was arrested, he admitted right away that he had been engaging in these acts with his daughter. The stepfather also admitted to the police that he and his wife went out and bought toys to use on their daughter. It seems as if the victim's mother and father felt like they needed to show their daughter how to use these devices, and so they did. So the suspects are currently being held in jail because they have 4 more children together. This time they are their biological children. And that's the reason why they're being held, because the authorities believe that these two parents may be a significant threat to their own kids. Now, we talk about stuff like this all the time on my TikTok, whether it's murder stories, stories about pedophiles, all types of true crime. And this is just one of those stories that I came across that truly disturbs me to my core. These were 2 normal-seeming parents from Utah. They probably had friends and family that loved and respected them up until they were caught. And it goes to show that you really just don't know anybody. And I'm sure that as more and more details are revealed from this story, it's going to get even more disturbing.
So basically what this is a real life audio of La Llorona.
Let me see.
So this is straight from the Pueblo, bro. No CGI, no fake shit. This shit is literally our boy's uncle, bro.
What the fuck with all this shit in the back?
His houses and stuff, bro. He's just outside, like, walking.
You believe in La Llorona?
Yeah, bro. I'm pretty sure we talked about the legend before. There's different ways of interpreting the story. I know a lot of people have different ways of talking about it. But from what I heard is that there was this lady who fell in love with some guy. He had kids with her, but the guy didn't love her back. He ended up cheating on her and stuff, left her with the kids, and she ended up taking out all her anger on the kids, drowned them, and then she ended up regretting it. And now she's cursed forever to roam Earth with the whole guilt of her killing her kids. So if you hear her cry at night outside, bro, y'all know to go the fuck inside.
Regardless if it's paranormal or not, just hearing a cry at night, I'm gonna fucking dip.
This is one of the most random deaths of all time. Prepare yourself for what you're about to hear. In March 2024, not too long ago, one of the most mind-blowing and horrific deaths occurred. This is Yogesh, who is 24, and on that day in March, something terrible happened. Yogesh took his bike to get some work done on it at a place where his friend worked. He wanted to fix some issues with it and wanted to get it cleaned also. As Yogesh's friend Murali, who is 23, was washing the bike and air drying it, the both of them began fooling around a little. Murali blew air into Yogesh's face, and trying to be funny, Yogesh bent over and Murali held the air compressing pipe up to his anus. Even though the air pressure was not close to him, the pressure of the air was so high it ruptured Yogesh's anus and entered his rectum. Yogesh then fell unconscious and was bleeding badly. Murali began freaking out and took Yogesh to the hospital with a couple of his co-workers. But sadly, once at the hospital, Yogesh's condition worsened and he passed away days later. His friend Murali faces culpable homicide charges for this unfortunate situation. This case is just so unlucky and should have never have happened. Two friends were just fooling around and there was no ill intentions. I feel so bad for Murali because he obviously didn't mean to kill his friend. It was a 1 in a million thing that happened and it's just awful. May Yogesh rest in peace. It was not your time to go.
There's a strange missing persons case happening right now out of Arizona, and we should talk about it. This is Chelsea Grimm. She went missing during a cross-country road trip from San Diego to Connecticut where she was traveling for a wedding. The timeline of events leading up to her disappearance is bizarre, and it's what makes this case so strange. On September 24th, Chelsea left her home in San Diego to head out for the wedding in Connecticut. She was traveling alone, but she did have her pet bearded dragon with her. On September 27th, just 3 days into the trip, she met up with a friend in Phoenix, Arizona. And it was at this point that she called her parents and said that the drive was actually taking longer than she thought. So she was just going to skip the wedding, maybe do a little bit of camping, and then head back home to San Diego. This was the last time that her parents heard from her, but this is where it gets confusing. Chelsea was actually spotted at a hotel in Seligman, Arizona that day after the phone call with her parents. According to a witness, she seemed disoriented and was trying to use euros instead of US currency. A day later, police responded to a report of a woman who was acting suspicious. And upon investigating, the officer found Chelsea in her car at a cemetery in Williams, Arizona. She was crying and she told him that she was working on a photography project about missing soldiers. She also told the officer that she was planning to camp in her car that night. So after he deemed her to be okay, he suggested that she go to a Love's truck stop to sleep in her car overnight. At this point, it's not known if she actually did that or not. On September 30th, a woodcutter reportedly saw Chelsea camping in her car near Ash Fork, Arizona, but she apparently seemed okay, so no call was made. By October 4th, Chelsea's parents officially reported her missing after not hearing from her. And just 1 day later, hunters found her white 2019 Ford Escape abandoned in the middle of a dirt road near Ash Fork. Both of the tires on the right side of the car were flat, and all of her personal belongings, including her pet bearded dragon, were missing from the car. The vehicle was found to be locked, and it appears that there were no obvious signs of a struggle. But it's now been a month since Chelsea was last seen or heard from. Her family has since hired a private investigator to find out what exactly happened to her. With the car being abandoned on a dirt road with 2 flat tires, and the fact that she was a woman traveling alone is really concerning. These are some photos of what she was last wearing, including a photo of her bearded dragon and a mask that she normally wears. Police across multiple states are now looking for Chelsea, and they're asking anyone with information to call the sheriff's office at 928-774-4523.
This girl is proof that a lot of rock stars are pedophiles. And this is extremely sad. So this is Lori Maddox. And as Wikipedia states, she's a former child model and a baby groupie of the 1970s. So when she was only 13 years old, Lori started frequenting clubs in West Hollywood like the Whiskey A Go-Go. And in June of 1972, when she was only 13 years old, Lori was, as she claims, kidnapped. Lori had been kidnapped by Led Zeppelin's tour manager, a man named Richard Cole. Lori was then brought to Led Zeppelin guitar player Jimmy Page's room and basically kept there. Basically, Jimmy, who was 28 years old at the time, told Lori that he said he'd have her, so it's time to have her. And that started off their relationship. Jimmy reportedly kept this secret because he knew that it was wrong. It was statutory rape. He was 28 years old and she was only 13. And he went to great lengths to make sure that nobody would see him and Lori out in public. This included keeping her in secluded rooms where no one could see the two together. But their relationship is extremely well documented, and yes, this makes Jimmy Page a pedophile. But Jimmy wasn't the only adult that Lori was involved with while she was a minor. According to Lori, she actually lost her virginity to David Bowie. Yes, once again while she was a teenager. And she also claimed to have slept with Mick Jagger when she was only 17. Now, the photos of Lori Maddox are extremely sad and disturbing, especially when you realize that all the men in these pictures are very old, 28, 30, 32. And in these photos, Lori is literally a teenage girl. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, and it really perplexes me as to why people don't talk about this more. Like, nowadays, there's a massive discussion, a reckoning of things that have happened in the past, and yet with a lot of these classic rockers who had established relationships with minors, many of them physical in nature, they seem to just get glossed over. Now, Lori Maddox in her adult years actually came out and said that she couldn't wish this fate on her daughter. Here's a quote from her. She said, "I don't think underage girls should sleep with guys. I wouldn't want this for anybody's daughter. My perspective is changing as I get older and more cynical." So who knows at the end of the day exactly what all happened to Lori Maddox and who did what with her. But this story is extremely sad and disturbing and really makes you wonder how many of these old classic rock people did stuff like this. And what stories and things that they've done will never come to light because they've been hidden so well. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
I'm gonna talk about is the Epstein Island before the Epstein Island. And I would say the 70s. There was an island called North Fox Island, and it was purchased by a millionaire. His name is Francis Sheldon. It was a remote island. He ended up building an airstrip, so it'll be easier for people to come in and get out the island faster. And then with the help of two other guys, he ends up building a boys camp. Puts like ads everywhere and shit like that. So basically like the premise of the boys camp is for young boys, unprivileged boys to come in, have a good time, learn about nature. So after that, as summer camps going on for years and stuff, the boys start complaining to the parents and friends, saying how like the teachers, the counselors on the island taking advantage of these kids. They're telling them to go into like these cabins and like telling them, yo, like remove all your clothes. And like obviously cops hear about this. They make this whole plan like to raid the fucking island, capture everybody who's on there. But since Francis Sheldon was like a millionaire, he had like a lot of connections, he was basically tipped off before that even happened. So people basically warned him that they were gonna do this. Cops and shit like that was gonna raid. So he got rid of everything that would incriminate him, disappears, flies to in France, gets married, starts a new life, so he never has to pay for
any of the shit
whatever. I do want to give a little backstory about the two guys that basically helped the millionaire. So there was a guy, his name was Gerald Richards. He was like one of the main guys who helped a lot with the campus stuff. He was a gym teacher for preschoolers and stuff. When he was in college, he had a job at an adult bookstore. Him working at the adult bookstore figured out that there was a black market for CP and stuff like that. From there, he would...
This is how Snapchat helped to solve the murder of a teenager who was shot in Merseyside. On the 7th of April 2020 in Sefton, Merseyside, a distressed call came into the police. It was the younger brother of 20-year-old Mikey Rainsford. He stated, "My brother's just been shot." He then explains that we don't even know if we're safe and can be heard shouting, "Mike, wake up." Mikey's brother Josh and his dad had been watching TV. Mikey returned home that night at about 11 p.m. Mikey then asked his dad for a lift to his girlfriend's house and his dad agreed. His dad watched and waited as Mikey packed a bag of snacks from the kitchen. Suddenly, the pair were startled by two loud bangs. These turned out to be gunshots through the window and Mikey quickly fell backwards. It became apparent that Mikey had been shot. His dad started chest compressions while Josh rang 999. Soon, armed police entered the house and Mikey was taken to hospital but tragically was pronounced dead shortly after. Within hours, rumours were circulating on social media that Pip and Worm were responsible. These were nicknames of the Foy brothers, Michael and James. They were known to be involved in gangs and substances. Now, 53 minutes prior to Mikey's killing, a police officer was in the local area and noticed two people on a scrambler bike. Suspecting that this meant trouble, the officer called for backup, but she then noticed a house with a broken window. This was the house of the Foy brothers and their mum Joyce. It transpired that somebody had thrown bricks through the window and one brick had narrowly missed Joyce's head. Police started to collect CCTV evidence of the bike that had been spotted in the area, and they found the bike on CCTV around the same area and time of Mikey's killing. Police then got a search warrant for the Foy's property and found nothing. Strangely, James, Michael and mother Joyce all apparently lost their phones the day after the murder. Despite this, police were able to use mobile phone data to pinpoint the brothers' movements on the night. A Snapchat video was uncovered featuring an electric bike similar to the ones that the brothers owned from an account linked to James. This was the Snapchat image with the following text. Minutes later, Mikey was killed. There was no evidence that the bricks through the window had anything to do with Mikey Rainsford. By all accounts, he never got involved in any gangs or trouble or substances. The Foy brothers' mum was charged with perverting the course of justice. She was accused of disposing of her SIM card and was jailed for 2.5 years. Michael Foy was found guilty of murder and got life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. James was found guilty of murder and possession of a firearm and got a minimum of 28 years. Their uncle Craig Johnson and a neighbour were found guilty of perverting the course of justice after getting involved in the aftermath.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
On June 11th, 2005, Todd Geib seemingly vanished from an all-night keg party. But 22 days later, his body was found standing upright in a private lake that had already been previously searched. At around 9:30 that night, Todd and his friends left a restaurant to go to an all-night keg party that was being held in an apple orchard in Casanova, Michigan. As the night went on, things started to get really rowdy, so Todd decided to leave the party at 12:45 a.m. and walk back to his apartment, which was only about 1.5 miles away. Doing so, he called a friend to tell them that he was on his way back home. Over the next 10 minutes, Todd made a series of bizarre phone calls. At one point, he called a friend and said, quote, "I'm in a field," end quote, before the call ended. The friend called back and Todd picked up, but all they could hear was what sounded like heavy breathing, and then the call cut out. No other calls went through after this, and his phone wasn't used again. This was the last time anyone heard from Todd. He was soon reported missing, and an extensive search was launched involving more than 1,500 volunteers and police officers. Authorities even searched by air, combing through the orchard and everything around it, even the stretch of road he would have taken to get home. Authorities brought in bloodhounds, which tracked Todd's scent up until the start of the road he would have taken to get home, but that's where it ends. It seemed as if Todd vanished into thin air. But 22 days later, his body was found in a private lake just 2 miles from his home, right in the middle of an area that had already been searched. But the odd thing was the way Todd's body was found. His body was found standing upright in the water with his head and shoulders above the surface. Nothing was weighing him down, and he had no external injuries. His remains only had little decomposition. His clothing appeared to be completely clean of debris, sand, and that slimy green substance that lays on the surface of bodies of water. He also didn't have any insects in or on his body, which is unusual if somebody was actually in the water for 21 days. A group of former NYPD detectives named Kevin Gannon, Anthony Duarte, and Michael Donovan, and Todd's mom had an independent investigation conducted. And from that, they learned that while Todd had been missing for 3 weeks, he had actually only been dead for 2 to 5 days before being found. The autopsy report also showed no water in Todd's lungs at all. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believed Todd was abducted, held on land for a period of time, murdered, and then placed in the water after death shortly before being found. Adding to this, on top of alcohol being found in his system, he also had traces of antidepressants, but he was never prescribed those. The pharmacist working on the case stated that those pills would normally never be given together because if they were, it would likely cause confusion and hallucinations. They agreed that both the pills and alcohol found in his system would have left him completely incapacitated and unable to get to the lake by himself. Despite all of this evidence, the Michigan State Police ultimately ruled Todd's cause of death as undetermined drowning. They believe Todd left the party intoxicated and just accidentally drowned in the lake. But Todd's mom and Kevin, Anthony, and Michael do not believe this. I'm sorry I have to do a part 2, but that'll be posted in the comments right now.
This woman poured boiling sugar all over her husband's body, and this case is absolutely mind-blowing. This case takes place in England on July 14th, 2020. Karina Smith was a 59-year-old woman and was married to an 81-year-old man named Michael Baines. I tried to find pictures of Michael, but I think none are available on the internet. Michael was in need of care due to his poor health, and because of their difference in age, Karina was able to become his primary caregiver. The two had a child together named Michael Jr., and Karina had another son and daughter from a previous relationship. But in 2007, her son Craig took his own life at just the age of 25. Before his death, he went to prison for attacking a man. Following this, Craig became distressed and spoke to his mother. He said the man he attacked was a predator, and that a predator had touched him inappropriately in the past. He said, "Mom, he's a predator." Shortly after this, Craig took his own life. Karina had formed a relationship with Michael while he was in his 40s and her in her 20s. She said the relationship was positive at first, but that was until his age began to become more noticeable, and things started to deteriorate as he aged. But despite this, she still provided Michael with the care he needed. On the 13th of July 2020, people who knew Karina said she had been acting differently and was described as angry and very upset. This was because her daughter had opened up about some horrific trauma both she and her now deceased brother had experienced at the hands of their stepfather, Michael. Karina's daughter told her that when they were younger, Michael would take advantage of them both and would touch them inappropriately. After Karina heard these allegations from her daughter, she remembered what her son told her about being attacked by a predator. The guilt of Craig's suffering from such a fate stayed with her for years, and a deep rage began to burn inside of her. On July 14th, 2020, at around 10 a.m., Karina returned to her home that she shared with Michael. She entered the home and grabbed a bucket, along with 3 kilograms of sugar that she had just bought. She then began to boil a large amount of water, creating a boiling syrup. Once this concoction was ready and scalding hot, Karina slowly entered Michael's bedroom. Michael was fast asleep and totally unaware that his wife was standing over him holding a bucket filled with boiling sugar. Filled with rage, Karina began to pour the boiling sugar all over her sleeping husband's body. Michael woke up and began to scream as the liquid destroyed his skin. This mixture of sugar and boiling water is often referred to as prison napalm, due to the horrific burns it can cause. Once the bucket was empty, Karina ran over to her neighbor's house, which was 9 doors down. She banged on the door until the neighbor answered. Karina didn't know her well, but told her what she had done. The neighbor called the police and explained what happened, and when the police arrived, they entered the home and found Michael whimpering in bed with skin on his arms and torso beginning to peel off. Michael was rushed to the hospital and Karina was arrested. Karina was then asked why she did this to her husband, in which she explained what her daughter told her, and that she became so enraged that she poured the liquid all over her husband. Michael was able to be stabilized but suffered burns to 36% of his body, and 2 weeks later, Michael passed away from his injuries. Karina was then charged with murder and was then found guilty of murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 12 years. Cases like this always cause division. To some, Karina was a hero and someone who took revenge to protect her children, while others see her as a reckless murderer who killed her husband based off one simple allegation. So let me know your opinion on this crazy case.
There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now that everybody should be talking about. This is Nancy Ng. She went missing during a yoga retreat to Guatemala last month. The details in this case are bizarre because it involves a whole group of people who basically witnessed Nancy go missing, yet most of them refused to talk to authorities. So on October 14th, Nancy left her home in Monterey Park, California to go on a week-long yoga retreat to Lake Atitlan. This would have been her second year in a row doing this, and it was just something that she was really excited about because she loved the area and it was supposed to be just really relaxing. But just a few days into the trip, the organizer of the retreat called Nancy's family and told them that she disappeared. She was officially reported missing on October 20th, but the few details that we do have are really strange. Nancy was seen for the last time in this video, which was taken on October 19th. She was paddling on a kayak on Lake Atitlan and happily waving to someone off camera. She was with a group of 9 other tourists who traveled to Guatemala for the retreat as well. Nancy was last seen splitting up from the group with another woman to continue kayaking up the lake. According to that woman, the two paddled for roughly another mile before Nancy jumped into the lake and either drowned or disappeared. The woman said she then paddled back to the group, where they then all went back to the hotel where they were all staying and notified management. And when the hotel staff searched for Nancy and couldn't find her, that's when they called the police to report her missing. But this is when things start to get strange. According to the kayak company, who recently made a statement, all 9 of the other tourists in that retreat returned home the day Nancy disappeared. They all reportedly left the lake without saying a word, and they all checked out of the hotel within 12 hours and never paid for the excursion. On top of that, almost all of the witnesses in that retreat group have chosen not to come forward and talk with police. They never gave any witness statements, and they haven't been forthcoming with any information, which has severely hindered the investigation. Guatemalan officials searched the lake and Nancy's hotel room, but they suspended the search after just 3 days after finding no evidence. According to them, the weather made it difficult and affected the search. They believe Nancy drowned that day, and because there's no sense of any urgency to continue looking for her, this forced Nancy's family to hire an independent search and rescue team called Black Wolf Helicopters. They've been the only ones to extensively search the lake and surrounding areas for any clues as to what may have happened to Nancy. They've searched 95% of Lake Audit Lawn using helicopters, boat teams, and divers, but Nancy is still missing, and because not really anyone in the group is coming forward to talk with police, they stated that it should now be considered a criminal investigation. The woman's identity, who was last seen with Nancy, has not been released to the public that I can find, but according to Nancy's family, they know who she is, and they've even tried reaching out to her multiple times for some answers. Yet that woman has refused to speak with them. And what's also strange is that this woman reportedly told Guatemalan officials that Nancy drowned that day, but that witness statement is nowhere in the official police report. So at this point, with no one coming forward and suspicious witnesses with key information that's being withheld, nobody knows what to think. The FBI is now investigating Nancy's disappearance, and her family has since hired a lawyer in Guatemala to investigate whether or not she actually drowned. Unfortunately, Black Wolf Helicopters have since had to suspend their search, but they're demanding that someone in the group come forward to at least tell them where Nancy went into the lake, because it would be incredibly helpful to at least have a starting point. This situation is an absolute nightmare. I've attached a GoFundMe created for Nancy's family to help them continue funding the search, because as of right now, most of the search and rescue operations have been primarily funded by them, which is not fair at all. Any funds raised will go towards the search as well as travel expenses for the family, as they're wanting to be in Guatemala as much as possible. It's now been 3 weeks since Nancy went missing. It's time to find her.
This man won £1 million but completely ruined his life. This is the true crime case that shocked the UK. Prior to 2001, Charles Ingram and his wife were living a fairly normal life with their 3 children. On the 9th of September, he became a contestant on the very popular UK TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. His wife Diana and her brother Adrian had both been contestants recently and actually won £32,000. Charles was finally in the hot seat and ready to earn some money for himself. However, things didn't end up going to plan. On the first day of filming, he'd actually only managed to reach the £4,000 mark. Now, fans of the show know that throughout the programme, you move through monetary increments and you are allowed a limited amount of help throughout. You're able to use a total of 3 lifelines throughout your time on the show. These are 50-50, phone a friend and ask the audience. Now, when filming commenced on the first day, Charles has actually already used 2 of these lifelines. He wasn't anywhere near the £1 million mark yet. The producers of the show admitted that they were quite dismissive of Charles and they never expected him to get much further. On the second day though, despite everyone's doubts, Charles started progressing through the rounds. Although on many occasions he admitted to not knowing the answer, he was able to make several seemingly completely accurate guesses. He finally reached the £1 million question despite everybody's doubts. Again, after admitting to not knowing the answer at all, he gambled on the correct one. In front of the cameras, he seemed elated to have won, but behind the scenes, things were very different. Cameras panned to Charles's wife Diana in the audience, and she struggled to be even smiling at her husband's new millionaire status. The production team started to get very suspicious, and there was even rumours that the Ingrams were actually in the dressing room arguing after he'd just won £1 million. Producers actually were so suspicious that they decided to search Charles after his win. They were looking for any devices on him that might explain sort of the odd behaviour that he'd been exhibiting. On his person, however, nothing was found. That's when the team started reviewing the video footage of the programme. Now, there was actually a live studio audience at the time of filming. They figured out that Charles was strategically reading out each possible answer for the questions and then pausing. When the correct answer was read out, a cough could be heard from the audience. It was discovered that the cough would usually come from a member of the audience called Tequin Wittock. He was actually another contestant on the show, and at one point another cough came from Diana. The matter was handed to police and the three were charged with procuring the execution of a valuable security by deception. All three were given prison sentences, suspended for 2 years. They were all fined and ordered to pay the prosecution and defence charges. They all still do maintain their innocence to this day. Interestingly, in 2010, Charles actually had an accident with a lawnmower and lost 3 of his toes.
Did The Simpsons predict that the world's gonna end in 2 days? In 2005, The Simpsons released an episode called Thank God It's Doomsday, where Homer uses math to predict when the world's gonna end. And he comes to the conclusion it's gonna be 3:15 p.m. on May 18th. But there was never a year attached to that date. But some fans think they figured it out that it's this year. See, at the end of the episode, Doomsday can be watched on channel 23, which a lot of people think the show was subliminally suggesting that it was 2023. And this is coming after The Simpsons having other predictions that came true, like Trump being president, or even Disney buying Fox. Personally, this feels like a huge stretch, but what do you think's gonna happen in 2 days?
Seemingly innocent paintings with sinister backstories, Part 1. This disturbing self-portrait was painted by American serial killer and sex offender John Wayne Gacy. He was known as the Killer Clown and assaulted and murdered at least 33 young boys. After being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, artist William Utermohlen created a series of self-portraits to track the progression of his disease. And as you can see from the paintings, over time he began to forget what his own face looked like. This normal-looking painting of a bird in front of a sunset has a surprisingly dark artist behind it. If you look in the bottom right corner, you will see the signature of infamous cult leader and murderer Charles Manson, who was charged with the murders of 9 people in 1971.
This 13-year-old was murdered by accident when he tried to defend his mother from her boyfriend. In the early morning of March 24th, 39-year-old Houston Morris and his girlfriend, whose name has not been released, were arguing until things got physical. During the fight, Houston strangled her, hit her with a metal pipe and a bed frame. In an attempt to defend herself, she grabbed a knife from under the bed, but he managed to take it away from her. Houston then tried to stab her with a knife, but he missed, and instead he hit her 13-year-old son, Isaac Hoff, who was standing right behind her. Isaac at this point is bleeding out, so he calls police and he tells them that his mother is being attacked. When officers arrived, they found him lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen floor, and he later passed away in the hospital. Isaac's mother was found with multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks, and her 1-year-old daughter was also found with blood all over her. Houston pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and he's now being held at the Renville County Jail.
Selfies that were taken seconds before death, Part 2. Businessman Gia Lajuna attempted to take a selfie with a 1.5-ton walrus at a zoo in China. After climbing into the enclosure, the walrus grabbed him from behind, dragged him underneath the water, drowning him in a matter of minutes. Chinese daredevil Wu Yongjing was an Instagram celebrity best known for taking selfies on top of skyscrapers. While trying to take a selfie on top of a skyscraper in 2017, he lost his grip, falling 62 stories to his death. In 2014, during Spain's annual Running of the Bulls event, 32-year-old David Gonzalez decided to stop and take a selfie in front of 2 bulls that were colliding behind him. All of a sudden, a third bull that he didn't see came from his side and gored him to death.
This is the Slender Man. He's a supernatural being who preys on children. The most famous story about the Slender Man concerns a girl named Lindsay. After waking up at midnight one evening, she went to make herself a cup of coffee. A cold chill went up her spine as she walked past her front door, but it was locked, exactly how she'd left it. Unable to resist, Lindsay took a look through the peephole. She saw nothing but darkness, which is to be expected in the middle of the night. That all changed when she blinked and saw a shape in the distance. It looked crudely human, but it had long limbs, with bulky joints branching off into several arms. It was dressed in a black suit, and its face, if you could even call it that, was completely featureless. Whilst running back to her room, she slipped on some coffee and watched in horror as the door's deadbolt unlocked. Nicole, Lindsay's sister, visited her soon after at the hospital. Lindsay had a bandage wrapped round her head, covering both her ears as well as her eyes. She also had several burns on her skin. As Nicole entered the room, she spotted the silhouette of a man in the window, but the room was on the 3rd floor.
A man with no arms was charged with stabbing a tourist using scissors with his feet. John Crenshaw was a well-known figure in South Beach, Florida. With no arms, he would impressively paint pictures with his feet and was once a viral sensation. He was known to be homeless and bragged about impregnating many women, including, he states, Gwen Stefani. In 2018, he was arrested for a shocking incident in Miami Beach. A tourist from Chicago, 22-year-old Cesar Coronado, claimed to have asked John for directions. John claimed that Cesar had punched him in the head. John jumped up, stabbing Cesar with scissors using his feet. Police discovered Cesar bleeding from his arms and he was rushed to hospital. John actually fled the area but was found shortly after close by. He was charged with aggravated battery and had a history of criminal offences. These included disorderly intoxication, vandalism, and battery on police officers.
So a woman in Utah who wrote a kid's book about grief after the death of her husband just got charged with poisoning him. Let's look into what happened. And if you're interested in stories like this, check out the podcast. This specific episode is about another poisoning. So last March, 33-year-old Corey Rutchins woke in the middle of the night to find that her husband was unresponsive. She called 911, and when the cops got there, she said that it was crazy that this had happened because he had been so fine that day. But she did mention that that night she had made him a Moscow Mule. And what we know now is that drink had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in it. So she had spiked his drink that night, but investigators realized that this wasn't the first time that she had poisoned him. Her husband's family mentioned that several years ago, he had told them that he thought she was trying to poison him. Before being charged with his death, she actually wrote this children's book, which is about a young boy wondering if his late father is with him during big life events. And this actually comes after another high-profile case this year in which a Colorado man was poisoning his wife's protein drinks with cyanide. And before you say that people need to just learn how to get divorced, which I totally agree with, there's evidence that Eric was actually looking into getting a divorce and that Corey may have done this because she wanted to make sure that she was the sole beneficiary of his life insurance.
This is the moment right before a man accidentally killed a woman that he thought was his ex. 48-year-old Richard Montano is from Virginia. In late July 2022, his girlfriend Fatima Rojas broke up with him. She stated that their relationship was volatile and abusive. They'd been together 8 years and she'd had enough. She stated during their relationship that he hit and kicked her. On the 10th of August 2022, mother of 2, 40-year-old Sylvia Abakay was staying at Fatima's house. Unfortunately for Sylvia, she would be the horrific victim of mistaken identity. Richard knocked on the door and as Sylvia answered, he launched a brutal attack. He hit and stabbed the woman who sustained at least 10 blunt force injuries and 10 stab wounds. She managed to place a harrowing 911 call where she literally screamed for her life. Sadly, Sylvia would die from her injuries and Richard tried to cover his tracks by setting fire to the house. He used Sylvia's own clothes to light the blaze and try and cover up the hideous murder scene. One attorney stated, "This case exhibited some of the most disturbing crime scenes I've encountered." Richard was found guilty of first-degree murder and arson. He's currently awaiting sentencing and will be sentenced in January.
Imagine losing not 1 but 2 of your babies after leaving them with your mother. This is what happened to Kayla Nix, who lost her 16-month-old son Ezra when she left him in the care of her 65-year-old mother Tracy. On December 2021, Tracy, who was Ezra's grandmother, was left to babysit, but she fell asleep and Ezra managed to get out of the house and drowned in a pond. During Ezra's passing, Kayla was pregnant with Uriel and she looked forward to having her daughter after tragically losing her son. Now, when Uriel was 7 months old, Kayla decided to give her mother a second chance and babysit her. On November 22nd, Tracy was babysitting Uriel and she took her out for lunch with her friends, but then when she came back home, she forgot Uriel in the car. The temperature was around the 90s and Uriel was left there for hours. It wasn't until one of her other grandchildren arrived that she remembered she left Uriel in the car, but at this point, it was too late. Uriel passed away 11 months after her 16-month-old brother. I can't even imagine how devastated Kayla must have been losing both of her babies, and it was all her mother's fault. Tracy was charged with aggravated manslaughter, and Kayla hopes that her babies get justice and that her mother is put in prison. She faces 12 to 30 years in prison, and apparently she's devastated about this whole situation, and she says that she simply just forgot. What do you guys think about this? Maybe she's developing some sort of dementia. I don't know.
They won't bother you know what I mean? No, John, what, John? No, dude.
Yes, you just heard Johnny Elbows, this guy who's a massive meme on the internet for his antics, say that an underage girl has a very cute butt and then he smacks his lips. So if you hadn't seen Johnny Elbows in the last year or so, you were probably living under a rock. Johnny Elbows, a Nebraska native, actually went viral on another person's account first. And noticing that people really enjoyed Johnny Elbows' personality and his sense of humor, Big Boy of Omaha, or the Underfaker, started filming more videos with him. This led Johnny Elbows to create his own account, Johnny Thorington, which I believe is his real name. On his account, Johnny started posting lots of content, and eventually he and Big Boy of Omaha gained over 100,000 followers on TikTok. So everybody just thought Johnny was a goofy, kind of strange dude. But they had no idea what he would say on that one live stream. So on May 18th, 2023, Johnny and Big Boy of Omaha went live on TikTok from a local playground. And during this live stream, a group of young kids started harassing Johnny. Now, the Underfaker, Big Boy of Omaha, he started backing Johnny up, saying, "Hey man, just let it go, they're just kids." And that's when Johnny turned his head and made that extremely disgusting comment about a child. Now, since this was live, immediately hundreds, thousands of people started commenting in the live saying, "I cannot believe he just said that, that's disgusting." And shortly afterwards, screen recordings from that live went viral on TikTok. Now, this caused Johnny Elbows to vanish completely into thin air. Nobody knows exactly what he's doing nowadays. But it's deservedly so, because that's one of the most disgusting comments I've ever heard or seen here on this app. And I think if there's one person whose hard drive should be checked, it might be him.
Taken by a monster while playing out with friends, 5-year-old April Jones was last seen climbing into a grey 4x4. She was never seen again. April was born on April 4th, 2007 in Wales. She was a loving, cheeky little girl who liked swimming and riding her bike. She also suffered from cerebral palsy, but didn't let it hold her back. On October 1st, 2012, when she was just 5 years old, she invited a friend round after school to watch films. They then went outside to play on their bikes. It was already 7 p.m, so April's mum Coral only allowed her 20 minutes before she went out into the street looking for her. Only April was nowhere to be seen. After 10 minutes of frantically searching for her daughter, Coral called the police, and when they spoke to April's friend, she said that she'd seen April talking to a man and she'd then climbed into his van with him. April's disappearance was immediately escalated to a critical incident and a huge search began. April's friend had also given a description of the man that she'd seen April with, and a man matching that description was questioned by police. That man was 46-year-old Mark Bridger. They looked into Mark's background and found that he was a divorced father of 6 with a string of previous offences, including assault. His appearance matched the description that April's friend had given, and he also had a vehicle registered to him, which was a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery, which also matched the description of the car that April had got into. On October 2nd, the day after April disappeared, police were dispatched to Mark's home, and as they entered, they called April's name, hoping to find her alive. The house was unusually hot inside, the fire was still warm, and there was a strong smell of cleaning products. 30 minutes later, Mark was spotted by police and they stopped him. The first thing he said was, "I know what this is about," to which the officer replied, "Where is she?" Mark told police that he'd been drunk and he'd hit April with his car. This obviously contradicts the witness statement saying that she saw April get into the car with Mark alive. He said that he'd tried to revive April, but couldn't remember what happened after that and couldn't recall what he'd done with April's body. A search of Mark's vehicle, clothes and home began, and what police found just confirmed everybody's worst fears. April had been murdered. Her DNA was found on Mark's clothing, including the crotch part of his trousers, and blood splatter was found, matching April's DNA, throughout the house and in his vehicle. And in the fireplace in Mark's house, which was still warm, they found bone fragments, which were thought to be from April's skull. They also searched his laptop, and he had searches for things like naked 10-year-old girls, and he also had photos saved from Facebook of local girls, including April and her sisters. Mark was sentenced in 2013 to life without parole, and still to this day, April's body has not been found.
This is the worst pedophile in Australian history, and it was just announced that this guy has over 1,600 charges against him. So for a while in Australia, this guy's identity wasn't being released. That is, until just a day or so ago. Well, meet Ashley Paul Griffith. He's 45 years old and he's from Queensland, Australia. So between 2007 and 2022, Ashley abused 91 girls. And it took authorities 8 years to track this guy down because he wasn't just abusing these children, he was filming this and posting it on the internet. So Ashley was a child care worker, which meant he always found himself at daycare centers, which is where he primarily accessed his victims. In one of the more disturbing details from this case, Ashley abused reportedly 2 different girls at the same daycare center 24 times each. It was also stated that he abused 7 different children in 1 month. So at the time of Ashley's arrest, he was actually working as the director of a childcare center in Brisbane, Australia. I'm going to read you this little excerpt from his staff profile on the childcare center's website. He said, "I love engaging children in meaningful experiences that inspire their play and learning. Young children are natural inquirers, exploring the world through their senses, seeking answers and building theories." So Ashley wanted the world to see him as this caring adult, when in reality, he was the worst predator in Australian history, at least according to the news and authorities. So, like I said, all this was brought about because he was posting all of these abuses on the dark web, selling it to other pedophiles. He was the head of a big network. And in a disturbing twist, his own sister, after his arrest, has been trying to resell the cameras that he used to videotape these abuses. Here's what she wrote on Facebook Marketplace. She said, "I'm selling on behalf of my brother who's been recently incapacitated and is unable to do it on his own. I may not be able to answer too many questions, sorry." I feel like these cameras should not only be in the possession of authorities, but they should also be destroyed. No one should ever be using these cameras again. So yeah, I'm excited to see this guy go away for life. Truly one of the sickest people I've ever read about. And it's shocking to see people like this guy who like to act like they're caring towards children. They take these positions where they're working closely with children and they use that to get access to kids. I mean, it's just despicable. You never really know who you're trusting your kids with when you're bringing them to a daycare center.
At just 16 years old, Becky Watts fought for her life while her stepbrother and his girlfriend viciously attacked her, living out a fantasy that they'd sickeningly conjured up together. Becky lived in Bristol with her dad Darren and his wife Angie. She suffered from mental health problems and anorexia. She'd been seen by a number of professionals over the years, and it was noted that her behaviour was worse when she'd been in the presence of her stepbrother Nathan, who often teased her about her weight. Becky had told a family support worker that she was scared of a lot of things, but instead of listening to her, she was describing this assessment as controlling and lacking aspiration. She was treated as problematic rather than a troubled teenager with a difficult past. Nathan lived nearby with his girlfriend Shauna, and sickeningly, they had a shared desire to kidnap a petite teenage girl. They both seemed to have an obsession for young girls, and when the couple met, Nathan was 22 and Shauna was just 15. At 22 and 29, they lived in a filthy house and spent most of the time in their bedroom. They even kept a kettle and a toaster in there, so they didn't need to leave the room to eat or drink. Nathan was viewing pornography every day, and it usually included young girls or women dressed up like schoolgirls. The couple often talked about kidnapping someone, and Nathan had actually gone as far as telling Becky how he'd kill her, saying that he'd use a sledgehammer. She expressed to a family support worker that she was actually scared of Nathan, but it was never investigated. On February 19, 2015, Nathan and Shauna headed over to Becky's house. They knew she was alone, and they took with them handcuffs, a knife and 2 tasers. Becky was suffocated and stabbed in the abdomen 15 times. She'd obviously fought for her life as she had defensive wounds to her hands and arms. She was then put into a suitcase and placed in the boot of Nathan's car. They then actually stayed at the house for around 6 hours, with other family members arriving home. They then drove to their own house and put Becky in the bath, where they used a circular saw to cut her body into 8 pieces. They then placed the body parts in boxes and bags of salt. Nathan then actually paid a couple of friends to keep the body for him in their shed. Becky was reported missing the next day, and 2 weeks later her remains were found in the shed of Nathan's friends Jadine and Carl. 2 days after Becky's body was found, Nathan was arrested, and just 3 months later, Shauna was also arrested. Nathan tried to plead guilty to manslaughter, saying that he hadn't meant to kill Becky, he just meant to kidnap her, but that it went wrong and she died. And Shauna said that she hadn't taken part in the actual murder, and Nathan backed up these claims. Shauna was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 17 years. And Nathan was found guilty of Becky's murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 33 years.
Jadine and Carl were both found guilty of assisting an offender and sentenced to 2 years.
This is the woman people are calling the real-life Gone Girl. She faked her own horrific abduction and wasted 5 years of police time. You're not going to want to miss this one. It is absolutely insane. This all begins November 2nd of 2016. Keith Papini returned home from work at around 5 p.m. He was expecting to come home to his 34-year-old wife, Sherry Papini, and his 2 kids, but they weren't home. Keith called the daycare where his kids were staying and asked when Sherry came to pick up the kids. The daycare then told him that she never came, so the kids were okay. He immediately finds this very strange, calls the police, and reports her missing. This was taken very seriously by the police. She seemed to have vanished out of thin air. It wasn't long before the news was reporting on it, and her missing posters were all over California. Because there were no leads, fingers pointed at Keith, the husband. Everyone thought it was Keith. He even took a polygraph test and passed it, but people still thought it was him. That's until 22 days later, when Sherry returned. 150 miles away from where she was last seen, a driver finds her walking on the side of the road in chains. This driver called the police and she was brought in. She was covered in bruises. She had lost weight and her back had been branded. Understandably, police were shocked. When asked what happened, she claimed that 2 Hispanic women abducted her. She claimed that they were going to sell her to a man and that's why she was branded. Police were taking this very seriously. Sherry explained in detail the abuse that she went through and the room she was in. She also described the women enough for them to create a sketch of people who did not exist, because it was all a lie. Police found it very strange that these abductors just let her go, but this isn't to say that they didn't believe her. They definitely did, and they took it very seriously. They were determined to find out who did this to this poor mother of 2. The government helped pay for therapy for her PTSD and anxiety after this event. During this time, police were testing her clothes, and they finally found DNA. This DNA belonged to a man, not a woman, and she apparently encountered no men during this kidnapping. They put it through the police database and nothing came up. That's until 2020 when they decided to put it through a genealogy database, hoping that someone related to the person with this DNA went on like Ancestry or anything like that. With this, they were able to find the exact person with that DNA. And this person was Sherry's ex-boyfriend. The story only gets crazier from here, so come back for part 2. It'll be up the moment I'm done filming.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This guy is one of the most awful serial killers there has ever been, and I feel like he's never talked about. In my opinion, this guy's worse than Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. Hi Meg, I talk about your crime. Let's get into the story of The Butcher, the worst serial killer Canada has ever seen. Robert Pickton was born October 24th, 1949, in British Columbia, Canada. Robert had quite a bad upbringing. His dad was very abusive. He actually grew up on a pig farm. From a really young age, him and his brother had to work countless hours on this pig farm, and then they were forced to go straight to school without taking a shower or anything. Because he was showing up to school unwashed, Robert started getting bullied, and they gave him the nickname Stinky Piggy. As Robert grew older, he was said to be very quiet, but he apparently sometimes had these weird bursts of bizarre behavior. These bursts would come out of nowhere, and he would just start acting really strange. In 1996, Robert's brother opened up a kind of charity thing. The charity was started to try to make more money for their pig farm. It was called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. And what they would do is they would hold huge parties and raves to try and raise money. And I'm not joking when I say huge parties and raves. 17,000 people were said to have shown up at one point. 17,000 people at once. Sex workers and biker gangs would join these parties as well. But for Robert, it all started going downhill in 1997.
when he attempted to murder a girl. I don't usually do this in these videos, but a lot of you ask what blush I use, and this is the blush I use. It's usually £10 on the TikTok shop, but it's on for $5 right now. So if you click right here, you can get it. I just ordered kind of a peachy version of this. I'm not being paid to talk about this. I just saw they were on offer and you guys ask about these all the time. So get your hands on them for cheap while you can. So Robert attempts to murder a woman for the first time that we know of. According to her statement, he attempted to handcuff her and then he started stabbing her multiple times before she managed to get away. This should have been the thing that got him on police radar, but he was able to get the charges dropped because the woman he attacked was on a lot of drugs at the time, and Robert used that to come up with a story. He told police, like, she was hitchhiking, I was just trying to help her, and she attacked me. And they believed him because she was on drugs. And unfortunately, for the next 60 women he would kill, he was let go. And he was able to come up with a strategy that wouldn't get him caught next time. He developed a plan and started killing a bunch of women. And Robert was really, really good at staying under the radar. Now, what did he do exactly? Let me tell you. Because it's disturbing. First of all, he always went for hitchhikers, addicts, or prostitutes. And what he would do is he would promise them money, drugs, accommodation, anything to get them back to his farm. Once he got them back, he would then shoot or strangle them to death. And this next part is why he was given the name the Butcher. He would take the victims' bodies, chop them up, and feed them to his pigs. Now, if you're not aware of this already, pigs will literally eat anything, everything. So the evidence was just, bye. They were getting rid of the evidence for him. All of a sudden, there is an increase in missing women in the area. But sadly, because he only went after sex workers or addicts or hitchhikers, no one cared. And this always makes me so mad with cases like these. Like, they're still human beings, but no bodies were showing up, so there was no crime, no body, no crime. But as the numbers started rising, people were kind of getting a bit worried. A group of people that weren't the police actually got a list together of all of the names of these young women who were missing. They brought that to the police and were like, do you see now? And that's when the investigation actually began into finding out what happened to these girls. And all of these girls had one person in common: Robert Picton. He was the only person whose name continuously came up when they were looking for these girls. Police needed a way to get onto the farm with a warrant without him knowing about it and hiding all the evidence first. And so they heard that he had possession of an illegal firearm. And so they used that as the cover-up to get onto his property. On the property, they found multiple items that belonged to these missing women, along with some blood-stained clothing and tiny bone fragments. Now, things aren't looking too good for Robert, but because the pigs had eaten all the evidence, basically all of it, they were only able to charge him with the murder of 6 women. And so he got 6 counts of murder. When he got arrested, he actually said that he killed 49 women and that he was sad that he didn't get to round up to 50. What the hell, Robert? What does he want the police officer to say, like, oh, I feel so bad for you? No! He was arrested in 2002, and this trial was huge. Of course, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But guys, that's not the worst part of this story, because I'm getting to that now. One element of the story that I kept out until now is that Robert sold the meat of his pigs to people who lived around the area. These pigs, who ate the remains of 60 women, were sold to his neighbors. When I say neighbors, I just mean people who live in the area. So like secondhand cannibalism. I could never eat pig again if that was me. So yeah, they were pretty disturbed and freaked out by this information, which is totally understandable and just totally disgusting. After a huge search of his property, police now believe that the number of women Robert killed was in the 60s. 60 women. 60 mother, daughters, wives. It's insane. It really annoys me with cases like these. I know it was like in 2002 and things have changed, but have they? I find that a lot of cases like these that I cover always start with, oh, all these women were going missing, but they were sex workers, but they were drug addicts, who cares? And it's like, it's insane to me that like they're not seen as equals to any other woman walking on the street, but whatever. Hopefully that changes. And for those wondering, I have actually covered this story before, but the quality of the video was so bad that I couldn't keep it up anymore. Like, it really bothered me to watch back, so I thought I would remake it in a higher quality way. I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless, and have a wonderful day. My heart goes out to every single one of the victims, their families, and people who cared about them, and I hope Robert rots in jail. Anyways, this is not a good representation of Canadians. We're actually really nice people. I'll see you all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye!